All right, we're back. Hi, I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org, a political commentator and attorney here in the city of Indianapolis. And we're here having a conversation with Chase Oliver, the Libertarian candidate for president. Obviously, right now, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are participating in the debate hosted by ABC News. But Chase was not invited to participate, so we just figured to have a little conversation here. So, Chase, my friend, always good to be here. Thank you for coming.
Hey, thank you for having me here. And I look forward to kind of counter-programming what the duopoly is putting out there on the debate stage. I think it's always important to hear an alternative view. And so far, I think what we've heard tonight is just kind of back and forth on who's been worse in the economy. And I have the answer. They've both been terrible in the economy.
Well, first of all, let our audience know, for those folks who are watching, who is Chase Oliver? And why are you running for president?
Yeah, well, I'm a 39-year-old resident of Atlanta, Georgia, and I am I've been a political activist my entire adult life, but I've been a Libertarian Party member for the last 10 years, and I really think voters deserve to have more than two choices on the ballot, and we need to have a choice that actually represents free market principles, which we're not getting from the Democrats. We're not getting from the Republicans. And so I wanted to make sure that voters had an alternative that they could feel good about voting for, that's going to allow them to empower their own lives and control their own destiny, so long as they're not harming anybody, which is what liberty is all about. And we're just not seeing that from either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. And it's time we have that on the ballot.
Now, I'll be asking, obviously, Chase some questions. We'll be following the questions along with the debate. If you got a question or two, you can text us in the chat room on our various platforms. We'd be happy to have your questions. I just got one question on the economy. And the question is, the economy, the cost of living. Are we better off than we were 4 years ago?
I think in some aspects we are, but in many aspects we aren't, because we've continued the debt and deficit spending, which has created the inflation pinch we're feeling. That inflation pinch was not just solely responsible from the Biden and Harris administration. Much of what we're feeling now that's making our life more miserable than it was 4 years ago is the inflation coming home to roost from all the COVID spending, $2.2 trillion in COVID spending. And Donald Trump said that wasn't even enough. He actually wanted Congress to pass more, which would have created more inflation. And so I think, yes, we've taken a step backwards, but it's not just the Biden administration that's solely responsible for that, because the inflation is at the feet of both the Biden and the Trump administrations.
Well, let's talk about inflation, because obviously inflation is a big issue, a big deal. How would you, as president, address the inflationary issue?
Well, the first thing we have to do is stop the primary driver of inflation, which is debt and deficits. When we're printing trillions of dollars out of thin air, when we do that, it devalues the dollar that's in your pocket or in your business, in your bank account. And the quickest way to stop that is to balance the federal budget, to say we're not going to be spending more than we're taking in on a yearly basis. This used to be a rational idea, right? Like Democrats and Republicans actually balanced the budget in the late 90s during the Clinton administration. That was seen as good for the economy. That's the last time we had the largest explosion of the middle class in this country. And since then, that's become more and more of a radical idea as we've entered into this atmosphere of continuing resolutions, omnibus spending bills, Congress not really even legislating, amending things, being handed bills in the middle of the night that are thousands of pages long and being told to vote on these things. There's a real breakdown in the governance of this country, and much of it starts with the out-of-control spending in Washington, D.C.
So how do you get the spending under control?
Well, if you get elected president, I would challenge the Congress to let them know if they give me a budget that isn't balanced, I'll give them back a budget that is vetoed, and challenge them to actually make the cuts they need to make. Otherwise, they're going to have to override me. And if they do that, every dollar of debt and deficit that gets added is on their heads, not the executive branches. And we will continue to challenge them to balance the budget, to get spending under control by not adding taxes. We don't need to tax our way out of this. We need to cut spending to get our way out of this mess.
Where would you start with your spending cuts?
Well, you got to start with the primary drivers. So in the domestic budget, the discretionary budget, that's the military. The Pentagon spending, we spend trillions a year. We can cut that in half and still be fully military ready, I think. But the other primary driver is the entitlements: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. We Libertarians recognize that the government is probably the worst facilitator of health care that you can find, and you're not going to get a great retirement outcome out of Social Security. You're better off just putting your money in the S&P 500.
So let's start with Social Security, because you sort of got sort of three sets of people. You have our parents, who are sort of the baby boomer generation. They paid into it. They're in their retirement years now. You got us, who are sort of Gen X, who are sort of half Social Security, sort of half not. But then you got sort of the millennials, Gen Z, who haven't really just started their saved in Social Security. So what is your plan to deal with those three distinct populations?
Yeah, so for those who are already at or in retirement or very close to it, my parents, a lot of people's parents and grandparents who live on a fixed income, they would get to maintain that. We would let them retire on that because they're not able to prepare themselves going forward. As we get to younger generations, say the Gen Xers, you're going to see a sliding scale of benefits rolling backwards until we get to about where you're 40 years old, which is where I am, where you're not going to receive benefits, but of course you're also not going to have to pay the employee contribution. You can take that money and invest it instead into a retirement account, a mutual fund, anything that's going to provide you a better return on your investment than the Ponzi scheme of Social Security. And so this allows for those who are at retirement or near retirement to be able to retire with some sort of security. It allows those who are maybe a little bit younger, who are nearing retirement, but still able to save up to create a better retirement for themselves. And for younger workers, it tells us it is our responsibility, which it needs to be our responsibility to save for our own retirements.
Should retirement accounts be mandatory?
No, I don't think they should be mandatory. I think if you are somebody who is going to be irresponsible with your money, eventually it's going to be charity or mutual aid that's going to have to help you out in the long run, or family or something else. But no, government shouldn't be mandating that you have to save money and put it away. It's a good idea, and good ideas shouldn't require force.
We're talking to Chase Oliver, the Libertarian candidate for president of the United States. As former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris are on the debate stage right now. Chase was not allowed to participate in that debate, was not invited. So we decided, hey, we'll just have a little get together right here. Let's talk about sort of foreign policy, national defense, talk about going after the military budget. What would you cut specifically?
Well, I think we need to start, first off, removing our military footprint from war zones around the world. We need to stop the policy of drones, which these multi-million-dollar drones do cost a lot of money. But really, we need to start removing our military footprint in terms of infrastructure, logistics. We need to find the bases that are going to be easiest to close most quickly and gradually pull ourselves back to where we're not militarized around the world. This is one of the reasons why there is so much tension with the United States foreign policy-wise. We have military bases all over the world. It seems like to many other nations around the world that we're trying to basically control the world through these regions, through our military actions. I think the first thing we need to do is find the quickest to close bases, close those bases, remove ourselves from theaters of war, and to stop funding military aid to the benefit of the military-industrial complex.
One of the things, though, with respect to the military and our base structure, even though the threat may have changed, a lot of folks, and for us too, our national security folks say we're there for stability and security, because as long as the United States is there, nobody's going to start picking up guns and start shooting each other and have a world in chaos, and we've got to come back and sort of clean up the mess that we sort of left.
I think, honestly, we have the world's most powerful Navy. And we have the ability to basically have floating fortresses around the world. We can be active in any area of combat that we need to be very quickly. We can mobilize. This isn't World War II where it just takes a long time to be able to move logistically around the world. We're able to move those resources into places we would need to be fairly quickly without having these permanent bases everywhere. I think it's kind of 20th century thinking to think that we have to have permanent military installations to have military readiness around the world. I think nowadays that's just not the case. Maybe it was 60, 70 years ago, but in 2024, I think, with the aircraft carriers, intercontinental ballistic missiles, drones, we are able to basically respond anywhere we need to if we were to declare war, which is the most important thing. If we're going to go to war, Congress should declare it. That is their constitutional role. We have not had a congressionally declared war formally since World War II. I think it's time that we ask Congress to hold their responsibility.
I got a question. And by the way, you can text us your questions on social media and all the platforms as well. One of the big things about is tariffs, because that's been a big topic of discussion. Donald Trump has talked about imposing tariffs on China and other foreign countries. I've always argued a tariff is basically a tax increase because businesses don't pay tariffs. They pass those costs along to the consumer. What is your position on trade and tariffs?
Well, that's a very easy argument to make because it's exactly what it is. A tariff is a tax on the consumer. China does not pay that tariff. Trust me, I worked in maritime logistics, moving goods from one part of the world into the United States, all over the world into the United States. I know the impact of those tariffs. It's going to lead to less trade with other nations, or it's going to lead to higher costs when you buy foreign goods. But all of that hits the consumer at the bottom line, and it does affect American jobs. When you reduce the amount of imports we're bringing to this country, you got to think about it. Say you're bringing a T-shirt from Vietnam, right? You bring those T-shirts in on a container. That container gets unloaded in the United States by American workers. It gets put on a train or a truck by American workers and is moved to a warehouse that's run by American workers, and it goes onto another truck that's driven to the Walmart eventually. All of that staffed by Americans. All of that creates American jobs down the line. And when you raise the cost via tariffs, you're actually going to cost jobs and you're going to make goods more expensive. We need to actually have a free trade warrior who's fighting for the presidency. And I believe I'm the only one, not just the Democrats and Republicans, but even the independent candidates who are out there. I'm the only one who's trying to fight for a truly free market. And I think it's the best way to engage with our neighbors, because, hey, if I'm buying something from you or selling something to you, I have a pretty good interest in not shooting at you, and you have a good interest in not shooting at me. And so I think it would create more peace around the world if we embraced free trade and tore down these barriers.
So what does a free trade policy look like?
So it looks like, really creating no barriers to entry for people to trade goods within or outside of the United States. And I understand not every other nation is going to honor that the same way we would, but that's going to be to their detriment. If China puts tariffs on American goods, that's going to affect the Chinese consumer. We need to be concerning ourselves with what is best for American consumers and American business, and that is to be able to have a market of goods that can come in fairly easily without any trade barriers at all. So fully free trade, no ifs, ands, or buts.
Now, the question is, though, but can you have free trade when other nations sort of subsidize their respective industries, whether it's things like sugar or coffee, automobiles? If other nations are getting, other international companies are getting sort of subsidies from, say, Germany, England, India, China, how can we have technically free trade? And Americans don't do anything, but the other guys are getting all these sort of financial advantages.
Yeah, well, we need to look at how are they getting those financial advantages? How are they getting these subsidies? These subsidies are coming from taxation of that nation's people. It's coming out of the pockets of the Germans or the Italians or whoever it is putting these subsidies on their products, and that's a very inefficient way to try to guide the marketplace. Central planning is doomed to fail. And so actually when you rely on the trillions of marketplace decisions that individuals make, as opposed to the hundreds or thousands of decisions made by a group of central planners, you actually get greater marketplace efficiency. We're actually able to better compete. And if we, I want to remove all subsidies and deductions from all industries in the United States and overall just lower the cost of doing business, lower the tax impact completely, removing the state's impact from business. I think if we did that, we'd see a much better allocation of resources instead of a government trying to pick winners and losers, which inevitably will create screw-ups. And so I think it's a better idea for us to just truly lower the cost of doing business overall instead of deciding what industry we want to subsidize, what industry we want to give deductions to. Let's just truly compete.
And that brings up another interesting question is, because once again, I understand your point of view, lowering tariffs, lowering trade, but if other countries aren't doing it, should we play by their rules until everybody lowers their trade and tariffs, or should we just act unilaterally?
No, we need to call their bluff, in particular with China. China is manipulating their currency. They're putting up barriers to trade with us. And what that is doing is that is creating an artificial bubble in their economy that eventually will burst, leading them into recession or possibly depression. We need to continue to be trading as hard as we can with the economic engine of the United States to call their bluff. And eventually when they do go belly up, when the economy kind of turns in China, we're going to hopefully see the population demanding more market liberalism from their government. And that's the way we can truly make change without having to fire a single shot, without having to go to war. Let's just call them on their bluff, let them blow up their economic engine, and let us continue to trade around the world as the true free trade nation.
Your thoughts on Russia and the situation in the Ukraine?
Well, I want to see remove ourselves militarily from that. I think if there's if Western Europe wants to supply military aid to Ukraine, I think they should be free to do so. But after we've given over $150 billion of military aid, I think it's time for us to look at other ways that we can help people who are stuck in the crossfire, either by allowing independent organizations to sponsor refugees to come here and get out of the war zone, or by allowing amnesty for those who have been conscripted to fight in a war they don't want to fight in. I believe conscription is slavery, and I can think of no better use of an asylum claim than saying the government is forcing me to put a gun in my hand and kill people. I don't want to do that. And so I think if we offered amnesty, particularly to the Russian military, who's mostly made up of conscripts at this point, we would see a lot of people laying down their arms and wanting something better.
However, by not getting involved, do we basically have the old domino theory effect? Okay, today it's Ukraine, tomorrow it's Poland, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Hungary. I almost going to say I've seen this movie before.
Yeah, I think maybe if if we were thinking kind of the 20th century mindset, that might be the case. I don't see that happening. I really don't see Putin trying to roll into Western Europe. If for no other reason, then that would really strike a hot war with the United States. I think he's interested in Ukraine. I don't think he's interested in going into a hot war with the United States because first off, he would lose that war. We would absolutely just destroy Russia if we got into a fully engaged war. But also, we're two nuclear armed powers. I don't want to see us getting to the point where we have a pissing contest between the U.S. and Russia, because that could lead to a mushroom cloud. And I think Vladimir Putin's also smart enough to know that too, that he doesn't want to get into a pissing match with the United States, lest mushroom clouds appear in the Russian landscape.
I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of VanityPolitics.org. We're talking today to Chase Oliver, the Libertarian candidate for president. Chase is not allowed to participate in the debate tonight between former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. So we're sort of having a sort of discussion here, and you can throw in your questions in our chat window and on the various Chase platforms. Let's move to the Middle East. Obviously, it's been a hotbed ever since day one. Your thoughts on the Middle East, particularly Israel, Hamas, and what should be done?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I think we need to recognize October 7th was a horrible day. And if that had occurred in the United States or in any other nation, we would be demanding some sort of response. I think the response that Israel has put forward has been so heavy-handed and destructive that has turned any goodwill they would have had against them in many nations around the world. It's inflamed tensions with the Arab world. We're seeing increased inflamed tensions with Iran and Syria via Hezbollah and what's going on there. And I think what we need as the United States need to be doing is disengaging ourselves from the military aid that's going on there, demanding a ceasefire, demanding a release of hostages as a stepping stone towards peace. The biggest thing there is that both the Palestinians and the Israelis are being let down by those who claim to govern and represent them via the Netanyahu government or Hamas in Gaza. Both populations are being let down by those quote-unquote leaders, and I think it's both those populations that are going to have to demand a change in leadership before peace can move forward.
Your thought? Let's change gears a little bit. Let's talk about immigration and border security. Obviously, that's a major issue, a major big deal right now with migrants coming through. Donald Trump is basically saying Kamala Harris wants to open the borders, let anybody and everybody in. What is your position on borders and border security? Well,
I think there's definitely a crisis at our southern border, but I don't think the crisis is necessarily because immigrants want to come here and work. I think we actually need immigrants to come here and work. Immigrants create jobs, they create businesses, they can help create prosperity, they can grow the economic pie of the United States. They can provide replacement workers for an aging boomer population, and we need those replacement workers in the economy. But what we have is a crisis of government complete mismanagement of how to bring those people in through the border in an orderly fashion. I want to see a 21st century Ellis Island. Come through a port of entry, declare who you are, do a background check, a health check, and then be given a visa to come here and work. The market will dictate when we need labor, where we need labor, what industries we need labor in. We don't need central planning of government to do that. But what we do want to do is make sure we know who's coming in, which is what most Americans want to see. Right now, we're just this crisis of red tape and regulation, and the asylum courts are completely backed up. And it's because we try to manage this through central planning. We need to allow people to come here to work. Labor and capital is also part of a free market. And we need to have the ability for people to come here and work. In particular, I use the agriculture industry as a great example of what Ellis Island, 21st century Ellis Island could bring. If you work in agriculture, you really only want to be here during planting and harvesting season. That's when you're making your money. The rest of the time, you'd want to take that money and go back to your family south of the border. But under our current system, you're just prevented from doing that. And this notion that, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden just want to let everybody in, I believe there are still border apprehensions going on right now. There's still the giant ICE machinations that, are terrible. There's still all sorts of human rights violations going on at our southern border, whether it's Biden as president or Trump. Neither of them have solved this because the two-party system is actually more concerned with kicking the can down the road and fighting over this issue than actually solving this issue, because if they did, they'd have one less thing to fight over.
What about the immigrants who are already here?
Well, I think we need to offer them that same kind of deal. If you want to declare yourself, go through a background check, you should be able to stay here with some sort of documentation. I think those who are already here who don't want to go through that process, there's probably a good reason for that. And that would allow law enforcement to actually focus on those who are here for nefarious reasons, be it human trafficking or, creating fraud by pressing fentanyl into look like Xanax pills and selling them on our streets. Those are things that need to be addressed.
Donald Trump basically wants to says there are 11 million people who are here undocumented illegally. Donald Trump wants to round them all up and send them back to wherever they came from. I don't know how you start rounding up 11 million people and change, but that's what the president wants to do. You're a candidate for president. Should we start rounding people up and put them in railroad cars and send them to camps and send them on their merry way?
Well, I don't know. First and foremost, it just sounds extremely ludicrously expensive to be able to do something like that. Like, it would cost trillions and trillions of dollars added to the debt and deficit that we just cannot afford.
And also, how do you not to cut you off here? My question is, how do you identify who these 11 million people are?
Oh, yeah, you're going to go door to door and you're going to start checking for papers. There's going to be huge civil rights violations going on, particularly for those who are like Latinos living in the southwestern part of the United States. Like, I would be outraged if this was going to be the policy that the president wants to put forward, because I know it's only a matter of time before agents come ask me and my family for our papers. And I think that's a gross invasion of privacy. It's disgusting, and it's not something we need to be seeing happening. It is something out of a dystopian future of going door to door to round up all the immigrants. I think it's impossible to practically do. It would cost so much money. It would create so many human rights violations. How about we just fix the system instead of just demonizing an entire population of people and then trying to root them out of this country? Many places where they create jobs, they create prosperity. Their kids are U.S. citizens. What, are we supposed to send these U.S. citizens to a place they've never been? There's a lot of problems, let's just say, with Donald Trump's extremely simplistic border policy views that just lack any kind of real nuance.
We're talking to Chase Oliver, Libertarian candidate for President of the United States. Chase not participating in tonight's debate between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. However, we are having a sort of debate discussion and taking your questions as well. So be sure to throw them up on the chat room. What are your platforms, by the way? So if folks want to...
Oh, yeah, you can find us at Chase for Liberty on all the major platforms. We're on X, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we are on YouTube, we're on TikTok, though. We're not on TikTok Live right now. We'll do a few more things on that platform very shortly. But yeah, that's where you can find us, at Chase for Liberty on all those platforms. And of course, you can go to the website, votechaseoliver.com, compare my platform to that of Kamala Harris and Donald Trump's, do a blind taste test, and I think you'll like ours the best.
Getting back to the economy, let's talk about unemployment. Obviously, there's a skilled worker. There's a worker shortage here in the United States. There's more jobs available than people. However, a lot of folks who find themselves unemployed or in sort of that lower rung of the economic ladder don't have the skill sets to fill some of those high-tech, high-wage jobs. Number one, your thoughts on our unemployment situation. Number two, how do we get people to skill up their abilities? Yeah,
I think it is a concern that we have a population, particularly workers who are getting older, who are not able to kind of fully transform themselves into the new worker of today, where you have to have these skills. Particularly, maybe that if you started working 50 years ago and you're still in the industry, maybe you're not adapting quite as well to these things. That is a concern that we have, and I think the greatest way to address that issue is to make it easier for people to get the education that they need to be able to train themselves, to advance themselves in careers, and that starts with lowering the cost of education. And there's a lot of ways to do that via marketplace forces. First and foremost, get the government out of the student loan process. They artificially inflate the cost of higher education by inserting themselves. Over 90% of student loans are backed by the federal government, and when you do that, institutions of higher learning go, oh, it's basically guaranteed money, so we can charge whatever we want for these programs, even if it's not really at market value, and that leaves people stuck in a student loan, debt crisis. It also creates a barrier to entry for those who maybe don't have the means to pay thousands and thousands of dollars out of pocket, but also don't want to get stuck in the student loan spiral. So we need to make the cost of getting educated, particularly in these high-tech industries, things like community college, associate's degrees, less expensive. But we do that not by inserting more government into higher education, but actually getting government out of the business of higher education, so market forces can truly take over and provide us the skills we need for the jobs for tomorrow.
Speaking of our colleges and universities, and full disclosure, I've been teaching for 20 years at the college and high school level. So I think I can say this with some sort of expertise in my background. What are your thoughts on the campus sort of, I would say, protests, for lack of a better word, that have been going on ever since the Israeli invasion? And I won't say invasion; invasion is not the right term. The invasion, the Israeli military maneuvers into Gaza and into those areas.
You can say invasion if you want to. But, I think free speech is something that should be valued, and I think students should learn the value of free speech and be able to organize and protest. And so long as harm is not being done to people, as long as they're using their voices and not their violence, I think they should be allowed to do that. They should be allowed to have their voices heard. It's kind of in the tradition of campuses of the United States to speak out, especially when wars are going on, to be those voices of peace. Maybe it's because it's that generation that if wars break out and they expand, they're the ones who are eventually going to get drafted, right? That's why we had the campus protests during Vietnam, because they were actually being sent to go fight in these wars. I think young people have a heart. They have the empathy to say, we want to speak out against these things. Maybe not the most organized way to do it. Maybe not the most effective way to do it sometimes, but they should be allowed to have their voices be heard. Free speech is something we should absolutely defend in this country, even when it's controversial speech, even when it might make some people uncomfortable. We have to encounter uncomfortable truths all the time, and campus protests should be no different.
Your thoughts on the whole debate over diversity, equity, and inclusion?
I believe in hiring the best people for the job. I don't think you should have to really look at the color of one's skin or one's faith background to determine that. I think we need to have true equality in terms of treatment under the law, in terms of bidding processes. But no, I don't think we should have to create diversity artificially through quotas. First off, we are a more and more diverse nation as the years go on. So naturally, our workforce is going to continue to diverse as we go in. And I don't think we need to have government programs to make that happen.
Just to push back just a little bit on the whole diversity, equity, inclusion, I fundamentally agree with you that we should all be treated equally. But there are some situations where maybe someone of a similar cultural background might actually work in a better position than, say, someone else. For example, if I'm dealing with inner city urban youth, some white guy from Noblesville or from some fluid suburb probably won't be the best person to connect with that particular individual because they don't have not a whole lot culturally.
Yeah. And again, you're hiring the best person for the job. It doesn't have anything to do with any kind of quota or hey, we need to have X number of people of this race or of this background or of this culture to be participating. No, you hire the best person for the job. If you're hiring for somebody who's going to be working in the city, hiring somebody who's lived in the city and interacted with that city might be better than hiring from somebody who's coming from the suburbs who has no real interaction with that community. You're still hiring the best person for the job. No DEI required.
Let's change gears a little bit and talk about our judicial system. There's been a lot of controversy around the Supreme Court with their decision with Donald Trump's immunity, with the affirmative action decision, the whole 9 yards. Is it time for our judiciary to be reformed, or is the judiciary fine as it is?
Well, I actually think we need to be looking to the judicial branch actually more in some cases in terms of things like protecting consumers from pollution and other things. We need to remove tort caps from that or from medical malpractice, so that way people who have been wronged can actually get adjudicated in court and actually bankrupt some of these people who are doing wrong by them instead of having tort caps, which are like government mandated slaps on the wrists.
Actually, as a lawyer, I've never been a big fan of caps on damages, but that's just me. That's my editorial comment for the day.
Hey, I don't think any lawyer is going to have a problem with no caps on damages. So yeah, I'm getting that trial lawyer vote with that one. But no, but the truth is that I think the judicial system can be used in that way. Do I think it needs reform? Ideally, like if I could wave a magic wand, I would love to have like term limits for the Supreme Court of 18 years. So that way, every 2 years, you're putting a new person in the court unless a death occurs. But that would require us to amend the Constitution, and that is very, very difficult to do. There's a high threshold, and whether it's judicial power or congressional term limits, limiting that is going to be a bit of a challenge.
Donald Trump has accused Joe Biden, Kamala Harris of sort of quote weaponizing the justice system to go after him. I disagree with that, but your thoughts on the justice system, and is the justice system being weaponized?
Well, I think it's not anything new to see people in power wielding that power to kind of push their policies forward. I don't think that's anything new. And in fact, if you listened to Donald Trump just yesterday, he was at a rally talking about how he's going to punish all the wrongdoers who did all the wrongdoing in the 2020 election and all those people. And it certainly sounds like to me that he wants to use his, if he were to be reelected, to use the Justice Department as his own weapon, as a cudgel to bludgeon his opponents with. That is not the purpose of a Justice Department. The Justice Department is supposed to be truly impartial. If I were elected president, I would, of course, appoint an attorney general, and then I would be about as hands off of that as department as completely possible, because you are also subject to the laws in the land as president, and you should be recognizing that the Justice Department should be something that's wholly separate from your political aims, from you wanting to punish your political opponents. That's not what it should be geared towards. It should be geared towards defending the civil liberties of the American people. That's the purpose of a Justice Department. That's the why we should have that. Sadly, though, and again, it's nothing new. People in power use that to their own ends. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have certainly done this. I think Donald Trump did this during his 4 years. It's why Bob Barr resigned, for instance. He wanted to utilize the Justice Department in a way that Bob Barr found to be unconscionable, so he resigned. I don't think this is anything new, sadly, from those in power. Maybe we need to elect a libertarian or somebody who's got the brains in their head to say, we shouldn't be wielding the Justice Department as a weapon against our enemies.
If you become president, obviously the president makes the federal appointments to the judiciary. Congress has a constitution. The Senate confirms them. One of the big debates, discussions always been about how should the Constitution be interpreted? Are you an originalist, or is it more of a living, breathing document? How do you interpret the Constitution?
Well, I think there's original intent there, but I also think if we just only went by original intent, we would. If we went by original intent alone, then the First Amendment would only cover the printing press and the quill. It does cover 21st century technology. It does cover what's said online. It does cover all forms of communication. So the Constitution has to grow with the culture that is around it. That does not mean that you can just interpret things out of thin air. It does mean that there's original intent, and that intent needs to be put through a 21st century prism. So I'm somebody who thinks that maybe I'm not a strict originalist, like in the Rehnquist or the Scalia version of things, but I'm also not somebody who likes to see legislating from the bench, whole cloth creating doctrines. That's how we got things like qualified immunity and other things that I'm really opposed to, actually.
Why opposed to qualified immunity?
Well, because it creates a different legal standard for those who are in law enforcement or in government to cover civil prosecution. I think if you do wrong, doesn't matter what industry you're in, people should be able to take you to court and adjudicate that. And just because you're a law enforcement officer who thought they were doing something constitutional at the time or it doesn't fit the standard, judges should not just be able to toss these out arbitrarily. It should still be seen by a jury. Citizens should still be able to determine the guilt or innocence there, or the culpability of what's going on. I don't see any other industry where we just say wholesale, well, a lot of times we'll just toss that out.
But on the qualified immunity thing, if you're a government employee and you're trying to do your job, and you're doing your job well, but somebody wants to sue you for whatever reason, it's going to cost you time, energy, resources, should there be some level of qualified immunity for the day-to-day governmental stuff?
No, what I'd rather see is
are we setting basically every law enforcement officer, every firefighter, every ambulance driver, every mayor, every city council member to be sued?
Well, I think honestly, a better way of instead of having qualified immunity, a better way to handle that is if you bring up a lawsuit that is deemed arbitrary and has no standing, you should be responsible for paying the legal fees of the people that you're suing, and that would stop people from these frivolous lawsuits if they knew, hey, if I'm going to put a frivolous lawsuit up there and a judge clearly sees that I'm doing this for BS reasons and now I have to pay thousands of dollars out of pocket, that's an incentive to have people not do that. And I think that's a far better incentive than creating the doctrine of qualified immunity, which allows bad actions to happen from government or law enforcement officials that then get swept under the rug.
Speaking of law enforcement, we had quite a few issues in this country as of late, whether it was George Floyd and what happened with him, the most recent shooting we saw recently, police action shooting. Your thoughts on all this police action shooting stuff?
Well, this is another reason why I think we need to see two other criminal justice reforms, one of them being mandatory body cams, because it should never be an officer's word against a witness, or in many cases a dead body, as to what happened in a situation. An example I use is that in my home state of Georgia, the Georgia State Patrol does not have body cams because they say, we mostly just pull people over for speeding tickets, so we have the car dash. That's all we need. But 1 out of every 3 shootings in that department happens away from that car camera, and that's too many. And so we need to be mandating body cams so that we know exactly what police or officers are doing in these situations. The other thing we need to have is officers holding personal liability insurance. So when they do wrong and when they are sued and there's no qualified immunity, when a judgment comes, it doesn't come out of the parks or the other taxpayer-funded local things in that community. It comes out of that personal liability insurance policy. That's also a free market incentive, by the way. to get bad cops off the streets, because if you've done too many bad things, you become uninsurable. And so that's what we want to see, is we want to see a free market incentive to get bad cops off the beat, so we have a more honest profession.
Transgender LGBTQ rights.
I think you should be able to have equal rights. Oh, we dropped out. Oh, can y'all still hear us? Yes. Oh, well, if they can still hear us, we'll keep talking, and we'll try to fix the video side. Trans and LGBTQ rights. I believe you should have the right to live as your authentic self in peace if you're not harming anybody, and that includes trans, that includes LGBTQ people. And ultimately, I leave, for instance, for trans issues, the instance of medical issues to be left in the realm of a patient and a doctor, as opposed to letting the government get involved there. We don't need central planning bureaucrats who have no idea what's going on in that person's head, in that person's body, or in that doctor's room, that doctor's office, to be legislating what's going on there.
We've had about, I want to say 10 years, I think, since same-sex marriage was legalized. The Supreme Court issued the Obergefell decision. Your thoughts on, like I said, the LGBTQ issues from that perspective?
Well, as far as marriage goes, ideally as a libertarian, I think the state could ultimately be fully removed from the idea of marriage altogether. We could be getting private marriage contracts outside of the auspices of government. But absent that ideal for me, I think anybody should be able to, any consenting adult should be able to enter into a marriage agreement with anyone else. And I think, despite what the critics might have said a decade ago, the sky is not falling. Western civilization is not fallen.
There are no flying monkeys had taken us to Oz.
Yeah, we haven't married our dogs. Like all these things that we're told were going to be happening when I was young, and George W. Bush wanted to put a constitutional amendment to ban gay marriage because it will lead to the downfall of society. We just haven't seen that be the case, and I'm happy to have been proven right.
Our guest on the program today is our good friend Chase Oliver. Chase is a libertarian candidate for president of the United States. We got about 40 minutes and some change left in our conversation with Chase Oliver as the debate takes place between vice presidential candidate Kamala Harris and Donald Trump as they vie for the Republican and Democrat nominations. Let's switch gears to January 6th. Your thoughts on it? Donald Trump has said he had nothing to do with it. Some folks call it insurrection. I say it was basically treason trying to overthrow the government. But your thoughts on January 6th?
Well, I think for Donald Trump to try to claim that he had nothing to do with it is quite laughable, considering he was on a stage giving a speech to many of these people, encouraging them to march to the Capitol. And then, of course, when the violence started breaking out, he was urged to, call in the National Guard, tell these people to go home, and he didn't for 4 hours. He could have much earlier on sent out a video saying, hey, I respect your passion. I respect you thinking that saying that I won the election. I agree. He would have said, I agree with you on these things, but it's not good to create violence. And I think he failed in that regard. And to me, I'll just say as a libertarian, right? Like I want to overthrow a lot of things the government does. Like if we're going to be marching to the Capitol, it better be for a better reason than to install Donald Trump for a second term when he didn't win the election. I think there are much better reasons to go after the government than that. But ultimately, I think much of what happened that day was very embarrassing. Like it was just embarrassing to see how quickly that stuff all broke down. And for those, I see people who say, oh, it was nothing more than basically a guided tour, or this, that, and the other. If that's what it was, we wouldn't have all been watching on television. Like I remember that day I was working, remotely, and I remember on the office chat, everybody's like, are you watching what's going on television? Oh my God, everyone turn on the TV. If it was just another day at the Capitol, just a regular protest, that wouldn't have been the case. And so I think it's kind of denying reality to say, oh, it was just a guided tour. But I also think, Donald Trump tries to downplay his own responsibility there. And of course he does, because he doesn't want to feel embarrassed by the fact that he tried to kind of sick a mob onto the Capitol.
One of the big things, though, in the whole January 6th discussion and the subtext has been the issue of, quote unquote, election interference and election integrity, and folks trying to, in those battleground states where things didn't go quite the way folks had hoped they would, maybe sort of toughening the rules a little bit. What is Chase Oliver's position on election integrity?
Well, I think the biggest election interference we see is coming from the two-party system that denies alternative voices in the ballot. There's a reason why I'm not in the debate stage tonight. It's because the two-party system has colluded to deny alternative options in the debate stage. That is its own form of election interference by denying the voters a choice, or actually being able to see their choices on a level playing field with the Democrats and Republicans. I want to see secure elections. I do think I'm an old school guy. I think having paper ballots that can be counted and recounted is better than electronic voting machines that are hard to audit, personally. But ultimately, I will say this. Joe Biden won the 2020 election. Donald Trump lost it. I don't think there was enough discrepancies to have turned that tide. There's always going to be some measure of wrong counting or illegal voting, these things. But I don't think what happened in 2020 rises to the level of that would have flipped the outcome at all.
Well, Donald Trump just said in the debate, claimed that he actually won the 2020 election, maybe on Earth 4. But he does bring up an interesting question. How can you ensure our voters that our elections are fair and they can trust the results?
Well, that is a great question, because ultimately that's the responsibility of Secretary of States in countries or in states across the country, as well as county election officials. Remember, this presidential election is not one election. It's actually thousands of county-wide elections that are happening all over the country. I don't think there is a silver bullet to creating trust in the American people other than trying to have a more accountable way to vote, which is why I support paper ballots over electronic voting machines that are harder for folks to audit. I think that provides a certain level of trust. Opening up the ballot access so more people can run for office, so you're not gaming the system on that end, and then ending the process of gerrymandering. I think that's one of the things that's just not talked about enough when it comes to secure and fair elections, is the fact that the parties in power have basically manipulated to safe districts for them and safe districts for the others, and that is its own form of assault on our democracy.
Let's talk about gerrymandering. How should gerrymandering, or how should districts be drawn? Should they be drawn by an independent commission? Should they be drawn by the legislatures? Because I'll argue, as long as there are people involved, there will always be some politics involved regardless. So I guess, how do you sort of minimize that? Because even you have a quote-unquote independent commission, well, who appoints an independent commission? The politicians do. Yeah,
I would support an independent commission if for no other reason other than I don't want legislatures doing that, because then they're they're deciding their own districts for the races that they themselves are going to be in running. And sure, any human being is corruptible, but I think having an independent organization, a group of people, community members who don't have a vested interest because they're not running for office in those districts is less corruptible than letting state legislatures do this, which, in my home state of Georgia, 60% of the congressional races at the state level are running unopposed right now. They either have one Democrat or one Republican, and it's because they've gerrymandered them to be safe red or safe blue districts, and they disallow any kind of competition from coming on the ballot. There's no Green Party to challenge the Democrats in those safe blue districts, or a Libertarian to challenge the Republicans, or any other party to jump in there and be a true competition. So it's sad, unfortunately. Voters are just left with too few options.
Our guest is Chase Oliver, who's having a part of our conversation tonight. As Donald Trump and Kamala Harris have their debate, we're having a debate discussion here with Chase Oliver. Chase, something you said was interesting. Actually, I would take this question first. Americans feel like they have to pick sort of the lesser of two evils, so to speak. Why should folks look for a libertarian choice who are tired of the traditional standard two-party system?
Well, first off, if you're picking the lesser of two evils, you're still picking evil at the end of the day. You're picking somebody that you're not fully satisfied with because you're scared of the alternative. I don't like voting out of fear. I like voting out of optimism and who's going to provide the best vision forward for the country. But there's plenty of reasons to vote for the libertarian candidate, especially if you feel that those two are the two evils that you're having to pick the lesser of. You can help build a libertarian party up in states all over the country with ballot access, with major party status wins. And you can also signify to the Democrats and Republicans what policies you want to see most. If the libertarian candidate, if myself, who is pushing at the top of my policy platform, balancing the budget, getting inflation under control, if we win a lot of votes, that is a signal to the Democrats and Republicans in Congress that more and more voters want to see that action on the economy. And so not only is it a signal to those who are currently in power, it helps build up the foundation for something that can ultimately, over the long term, challenge the two-party system. You want to vote Libertarian in 2024, so we have a viable Libertarian Party in 2028, 2032, and every election going forward that we can build upon and create a true competitor to the two-party system in the long term.
Any word of concern, because one of the big criticisms I hear about third-party candidates, particularly Libertarians, that you guys are quote-unquote spoilers, that with you on the ballot in certain places, that's going to probably hurt Donald Trump more than Kamala Harris. Your thoughts on Libertarians being quote-unquote spoilers?
Yeah, I prefer the term disruptor. I think we disrupt the two-party system more than spoil it, because frankly, the two-party system itself is already spoiled rotten to the core. If you look at the congressional approval ratings, it's consistently under 20%. But if you look at the incumbent re-election rate, it's consistently over 90%. That is a signifier that the system itself is broken and spoiled rotten to the core. All we libertarians are doing is challenging that system, providing a better alternative for voters, and disrupting it as much as possible. And so whether I disrupt this election and it benefits one or the other does not matter to me, because both of them are two sides of a terribly broken, corrupt duopoly coin that the American people just cannot afford any longer. It's continuing to create more division, more hyperpartisanship, more strife, more hatred of our neighbors, and continuing the debts, the deficits, and the wars around the world, that we're just not going to see anything different, regardless of which of those duopolists win in November, if it's not me.
How do we return to a sense of civility in this country? Because I remind folks that, yes, things are almost sort of hyper-partisan these days, but back in the founding of the Republic, what these guys said and wrote about each other was like, oh my God, thank God Twitter wasn't around, in 1789 when they're writing the Constitution, that Jefferson's a real butthole.
Yeah. It would have, I think
John Adams,
I think one of the ways we would have, I think one of the ways we can increase civility in this country is changing the way we vote. I think the plurality voting model has what's led to this division, because it creates this artificial need to have a top two or two-party system. If we had ranked choice voting, people would first not feel afraid that they're voting.
Let her on. So what exactly ranked choice voting? I know it is. You know it is. But
it's like an instant runoff. So if no candidate on the race gets over 50%, they knock off the lowest vote getter, and whoever those people voted for second, that's where their vote flows to. And so let's say you want to vote Libertarian and you don't want Kamala Harris to win. You put the Libertarian me first, then you put Donald Trump second, and you don't rank Kamala Harris. And then if I don't hit the threshold, if I'm the lowest vote getter, they knock me off, and your vote flows to your second choice. And this leads to, at least nominally, over 50% of the population is in support of that candidate or approves of that candidate. I think it is a better way to run elections. And it creates more civility, because if you're the Libertarian and you're getting 5 or 6% of the vote, well, maybe the Democrats and Republicans will come into one of your meetings and say, hey, Libertarians, I know you're going to mark your Libertarian candidate as first on the ballot, but here's the things that we're going to do if you mark us second on the ballot, we end up getting elected. We're going to do X, Y, and Z that's part of your party platform. This would create more civility, more coalition building, and more representative democracy, where people were actually, fighting for what the people want and not just for what the partisan bases are fighting for. And so I think ranked choice voting would go a heck of a lot towards creating more civility in our elections and recognizing the value of independent and third-party voices.
Speaking of lobbyists and elections, I always want to get your thoughts, just because it sort of seems like almost sort of a dichotomy. On the one hand, you want the free market to sort of operate in all aspects of life, but at the same time, you don't want an oligarchy of lobbyists sort of running your government. So I guess how do you balance those two?
Well, I think one of the things we can do is, honestly, when it comes to business, fighting lobbyists by just flattening the tax code and removing all these carve-outs and deductions and the things that they've lobbied for on behalf of mostly giant, corporate interests. There's a reason why small businesses create the most jobs in this country, or the economic engine in this country, but the profits are mostly with these giant corporate multinationals. It's because those are the ones that can afford to lobby our Congress. I would fight to remove their influence by removing all these carve-outs and deductions overall and just flattening the cost of starting a business. And so that way we have a truly competitive marketplace that's not being gamed by lobbyists who buy and trade our legislators like auction at a cattle yard.
What does a Chase Oliver tax plan look like?
It looks like cutting as much government as possible so we can continue to lower the tax rate as much as possible for every single American. Ideally, again, I'm a minarchist. We talked about this the other day when we were on the radio. Minarchy is like the minimal amount of government we think is necessary, and ideally that would be voluntarily funded. So like in the absolute North Star ideal, we would have no forced compulsory taxation. But in the meantime, while we work towards that ideal, I think what we need to be doing is reducing the impact of taxation on individuals and businesses as much as possible, so that way they can allocate those resources more effectively and efficiently in the free marketplace.
I want to go back to the Israel question. I had a question here from one of our audience here. What would you do to get negotiate with Netanyahu to get the hostages back that are being held right now by Hamas?
So I think one of the things we would want to do is Netanyahu would need to put forward a ceasefire plan. We need to see the ceasefire happening, I think, before we're going to see the release of hostages, because we're going to need a cessation of violence before we see, the Palestinians led by Hamas taking their first step forward. After tens of thousands of Gazans, innocent Gazans, have been killed, I don't think it's too much to ask for a ceasefire. For a full ceasefire in exchange for negotiations on the hostages. I think that has to be the first step taken by Israel, and it has to be that first good faith step. Without that, I don't think you're going to see the release of the hostages.
I've got about 15 minutes left for it to wrap up. Energy. Wind, solar, oil, all the above.
I'm very much an all of the above guy. So the largest energy sector that we give deductions or that we give giveaways to in terms of tax breaks and things like this is carbon-based energy, oil, natural gas, and coal. We still give lots of subsidies to green energy as well. I want to remove all of that altogether and just create a free market of energy. And I think the biggest thing we need to do is actually remove all the red tape and regulatory burdens that have existed around nuclear power for far too long that has kept it from being truly competitive. I'm not going to pick the winners and losers as president of the United States, but I can give you a prediction. If we had a true free market of energy, you'd see a lot more nuclear power plants coming online with smaller footprints in terms of you don't have to do acres and acres of solar panels or wind farms. You don't put carbon into the air. The waste can be stored and moved and maintained. And so ultimately, I think in a true free market, nuclear would be what would win in the long term to power ourselves the rest of the century and beyond.
Energy. Obviously, like I said, nuclear power is the way to go. But what about some of the alternative sources of energy?
Yeah, I think there's a place for all of these things in the energy portfolio. I do think that there's going to be places for wind power and places for solar power and geothermal power, and we're even seeing now collecting energy from tidal, from the tidal movements, that kind of stuff. There will be a place for all of that in the portfolio of free market energy. I just happen to think that nuclear is going to be the one that ultimately wins the market share there in the long term. But what we want to see is energy being as competitive as any other marketplace by removing the government hand there of picking winners and losers.
Let's talk about one of the big issues that the voters will take up this election season is the abortion question. It's on the referendum in a number of different states. The abortion question was just approved in the state of Missouri, where I went to law school. The question is going to be to enshrine abortion rights up to viability in their Missouri state constitution. Ohio just did it recently. So like I said, all over the place, over the ballot. I think it's like down in Florida also this go around as well. Your thoughts on the abortion issue? Where are you on reproductive rights, reproductive freedom?
Well, I am pro-choice. I do believe that, I believe in usually the most local government as possible. And I think when it comes to the question of abortion and bodily autonomy, that local government is your own self-governance, your own control over your own body. And so I would like to see, abortion being legal to the point of viability, and then post-viability having a doctor sign off on health of the life of the mother in those extremely rare cases. And I have also always been a supporter of the Hyde Amendment, which doesn't allow federal funds to fund abortion because when there's such a contentious issue, I find problems with taking people's tax. I don't want to tax anything. This is just one less thing to tax or use taxpayer money for, rather. But ultimately, I think there are steps we can take with the pro-life community to actually reduce the number of abortions. Making birth control over the counter, reducing the red tape around adoption will make those options more viable than having an unwanted pregnancy that you then have to terminate. And so I think there are steps we can take to absolutely reduce the number of abortions in this country without making it illegal. As for the electoral impact, I think in red states, even in the reddest of states like Kansas, you've seen abortion being defended at the ballot. I think it's going to draw out a lot of voters who want to see abortion rights defended. I don't know the electoral effect that's going to have, but voters who are voting to preserve abortion rights in those states can also feel comfortable in voting for Chase Oliver for president, because I am somebody who will defend your bodily autonomy and your medical freedom with regards to reproductive health.
Shootings. School shootings, mass shootings. We just had another mass shooting not too long ago near your home, I believe.
Yeah.
About an hour or so away. what, if anything, can be done to address this issue?
Well, first, the shooting that happened at Appalachia High School definitely hit close to home. I have family that lives in Winder. I have nephews that go to school in the school across. I have a nephew that goes to school in the school across town, and we know some of the victims that have been harmed in that shooting. My nephew does in particular, and so when I say it hits close to home, I mean it. But I don't think that we need to be going to just running to gun control as the solution. I think that's the solution that's been put forward by Democrats. The truth is guns have always been a part of our culture here in the United States. We need to examine what are the X factors that have popped up since shootings in schools have become more commonplace, since Columbine forward. I think the two major issues is the rise of social media, the ability for people to go online, to say things they would never say in polite company behind a faceless avatar.
I have some experience with that.
And of course, when you are, and of course, if you're somebody who's lonely or isolated, you can find your way right into very extremist extremist points of view online. So parents need to be maybe paying attention more to what their kids are consuming online and consuming what they're, and what they're going through. And the other big thing is mental health issues that are with these shooters. We're seeing an entire generation of lonely young men who are being prescribed drugs as opposed to talk therapy or other methods to help with those problems. And in many cases, you're seeing side effects that lead to violent ideations. And we've seen many of these shooters actually on these drugs themselves. So that correlation maybe needs to be examined. And of course, we need to harden the targets of our schools. We need to make it harder for somebody to come into a school and do violence, both by making it harder to get entry into that school and also removing the lure of gun-free zones, making sure that we have, if we do have resource officers who are armed, of course, if there are teachers who want to go through some sort of training to show that they are able to defend themselves and defend their classrooms, we should allow them to be able to do that as well.
Our guest on the program is Chase Oliver, the Libertarian candidate for president. We have them for about about 9 more minutes left to go. So if you got a question or a comment or a thought, feel free to go ahead and post it on one of Chase's platforms, and we'll be more than happy to get that out there. Also, we got another question from one of our callers. I'm here. Trump says if he wins, he will talk to Putin to settle this war. Do you believe that Trump could settle the war in the Ukraine?
Well, he says he's going to do it if he gets elected, before he even takes the oath of office. I don't think that Putin's just going to be easily deterred by Donald Trump going there and just sitting around a conference room. I think what's really going to happen if Trump gets elected is the way he's going to pressure Russia in the war is. I worry he's going to threaten escalation, and that's going to provoke even further action. I don't think he can just I got this all tidied up. That's not the way things really work. And I think Donald Trump often speaks both with simplistic and hyperbolic language that might be great for somebody who's not really thinking about stuff. But if you really want to get into the long run, he's not just going to be able to walk into the room and I'll just end this war with Putin tomorrow. There's a third actor there. There is the Ukrainians. They might have something to say about that.
We got a couple minutes left here, so if you have a question or thought for Mr. Oliver, I'll save my last question for you in a couple minutes. Anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to hit tonight?
I think the biggest thing that we're going to be seeing from Kamala Harris and Donald Trump is them continuing to attack each other's records as opposed to providing a clear, principled vision for what we want to see going forward. Now, I'm not watching the debate because I'm talking with you right now, so maybe both of them have completely articulated clear visions for what they want to see going forward and haven't attacked each other at all. But if I was a betting man, I would say that that's probably not the case. And so I'm hoping those who are watching this today can see somebody who is articulating their positions, who's talking more about what we want to see going forward from the Libertarian Party, the Libertarian philosophy, than just merely attacking my opponents. Because if all I did was attack Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, I would be no better than Donald Trump or Kamala Harris.
What makes your candidacy different than, say, Gary Johnson, who ran back in 2016, 2020?
Well, I think it's kind of a different lived experience. I'm the first millennial candidate for president across the country. I think I'm the first candidate who's actually had to grow up in the post 9/11 world. So maybe that's shaped my worldview a little different than those who grew up in the Cold War mindset. I'm somebody who's had to go to work every day and live live that life of having to stretch paycheck to paycheck and seeing the bite of inflation. That maybe Gary, having been a governor and been a very successful businessman ahead of time, maybe was a little more removed from. But that's nothing against Gary Johnson. I was super happy to vote for him in 2012 and 2016. But I think the biggest experience is, I haven't been in the trenches of government. I've been in the trenches of real life and activism, which, provides me a different insight than, say, an ex-governor.
We have any more questions from our audience? Or let's see, we knock out a couple more questions real quick here. drug policy, your position on drugs.
Yeah, I want to end the drug war. I think it's been a massive failure. I think if we want to just tally up the wins and losses in the war on drugs, it's pretty clear that drugs won the war because drugs are cheaper, more potent, and more available than they were at the beginning of the war on drugs.
One thing I noticed, not to cut you off, I'll let you finish. My theory is whenever we declare war on something in this country, we usually end up getting more of it. War on poverty, war on drugs, war on terrorism.
Yeah, exactly. And so for me, I think we need to end the drug war model and actually switch to a decriminalization model, allowing adults to consume what they want to consume and treating addiction as a medical issue rather. I don't know why I got stuck on that, but as a medical issue that needs to be addressed, and not something that needs to be adjudicated by throwing people in jail, creating trauma factories. And what's worse? If you're an addict, you get thrown in jail, you get traumatized for the time you're in jail, and the second you get out, what's the first thing you do? You try to alleviate that trauma by going right back to the addiction. I think there is a much better policy we could take forward using mutual and direct aid to address the crisis of addiction outside of the realm of government, individual organizations helping to address the needs in their communities and find more rehab beds than prison beds. I think that'd be a better way to address addiction in our lives, but drugs in particular, hey, do what you want to do as long as you're not hurting anybody, and legalize it.
And obviously, legalizing marijuana, I totally get and fully support. But the question is, what are the more dangerous drugs, like things like fentanyl, and also not so much the user, but the dealers?
Yeah, well, ultimately, I think the question of fentanyl is more about a question of fraud. I don't think people intentionally take fentanyl. And so fraud is an issue when people are, like I said, taking fentanyl and pressing them to look like Xanax pills, and you see people ODing, or they're putting it into the heroin to make the heroin more potent so they can cut it. That is a question of fraud of product. And if we actually ended the war on drugs, you could actually properly test what it is you're taking to know. So in the nation of Portugal, they decriminalized drugs, and you can actually take your heroin to a pharmacy, and they will test it for you for a small fee to let you know if it's cut with anything. That would actually increase the quality of product if we decriminalized, because we could address the fraud issue, as it were. But again, if fentanyl were legal, would you take fentanyl if it were legal today?
I like taking my high blood pressure medication.
Yeah, I wouldn't take it either. So I don't think that the illegality is what's keeping people from taking it. It's the extreme danger, and keeping it illegal is what allows the fraud to exist that is causing more and more overdoses.
I'm trying to imagine my pharmacist at Walgreens cutting my heroin down and testing the quality of the grade of it.
Hey, it's a brave new world we live in, and that's what they do in Portugal, and it seems to work out really well. They had the highest IV drug use in all of Western Europe before they decriminalized drugs. Now they have the lowest addiction rates in Western Europe. They've curbed the growth of HIV and hepatitis in those communities because they allow clean needles and clean use sites. And so, to me, just looking at a nation that's actually done it and seeing the positive aspects of that, I think that's something we want to move more in that direction, as opposed to the war on drugs direction we've been having since Richard Nixon, with no real success. Again, drugs have won the war on drugs.
My final question for you, because we're almost out of time. I'll give you basically 2-3 minutes to make your closing statement to our audience.
Well, my name is Chase Oliver. I'm the Libertarian candidate for President of the United States, and I want your vote because I know that voters deserve better than Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. I know voters deserve to have someone who wants to represent them, their families, and their interests, and empower them to live the lives that they want to live. We don't want to see the crushing inflation that's been caused by the Biden administration, the Trump administration's continuance of debt and deficit spending, which is the primary driver of the inflation that hits your grocery cart when you go to the store and you see less and less filling that up for the same amount of money. It is the Libertarian Party that wants to end the warfare state around the world and bring about true foreign policy that's rooted in the ideas of peace and diplomacy, free trade, and voluntary exchange. It's the Libertarian Party that wants to solve the crisis of immigration at our southern border, not by kicking the can down the road for another decade, but by recognizing that we need immigrant labor and we need to facilitate the ability for people to come here and work and start their American dream. It's the Libertarian Party that wants to get the government out of your life, whether it's in your bedroom, your boardroom, or just your own thoughts and the things you say and the way you express yourself. I believe you should be able to live as your authentic self in peace. And if you're not harming anybody, your life should be your life, your body should be your body, your property should be your property, and your business should be your business, not mine and not anyone else at the federal governments. And if you think this sounds like a good idea, I encourage you to go to votechaseoliver.com, encourage your friends and neighbors and community to go to votechaseoliver.com and support this campaign and help us travel across the country speaking this powerful, positive message of liberty that stands in stark contrast to the doom and gloom and pessimism of the Democratic and Republican parties.
Chase Oliver, sir, thank you very much for being with us. Always good to talk to you.
Thank you very much. And peace, love, and liberty to everybody who's out there.
And that's going to do it for us. We'll be back up with Chris Spangle. I'll talk to Chase Oliver in a little bit. Thank you very much for being with us. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz. You can follow me at indypolitics.org. And also my Twitter handle is indypoliticsorg or ATTY Abdul. Thank you very much for being with us. Always good to talk to you. Have a good evening.